Right. Do you think we go for it?
Yeah,
Okay,
yes we
so
go.
guys, thank you so much for joining us. You are going to learn about the Coxswain Job Description, and if you've never heard about that before, then that's great because you're going to learn something new. And so today I'm going to introduce Zoe, and then I'm going to put Zoe on the spot and see if she introduces me. So we've got Zoe Takayan. Zoe was one of the coxswains at the University of Virginia. She spent the last 4 years there. An extraordinary coxswain who has had a very unique experience where she got to cox both the British U23-8 and US Under-23-8 this summer. And hopefully she can give you a little bit more information on that. And in a probably a I'm going to say interesting experience for her. I was one of her coaches at University of Virginia last year. And so, yeah, guys, you've got Zoe here with you today.
And I, other than being by a window with a siren, so yeah, I met Morgan because she was one of my coaches, but Morgan has won almost every race you can win. Morgan's won the Charles, Morgan's won a world championship. And I would say that, like, to sum Morgan up, Morgan coaches by the way that the boat should feel, which I think is what makes it unique, like what makes having a coxswain coach unique. And I learned a ton from Morgan, and that opportunity to coach the GB8 came from Morgan. So that was like a huge learning opportunity for me. So I'm eternally grateful.
I paid her to say these things. Okay, so we're going to kick this off with the coxswain's objective. Now, other than to be safe, keep the boat in the best position so that we're safe in training, to run the training sessions, our paramount objective and the thing that we all love most is to do with racing, and that's to put the boat in the best possible water to allow the rowers to do their best rowing. That's what everything has to come back to. That's how you can basically be the best teammate you can possibly be in your team, regardless of who it is and where you are and what the conditions are doing. We put the boat in the best position to allow the rowers to do their best rowing. In order to do that, as coaches, and then as coxes as well, we have to understand that our greatest opportunity to ensure that coxswains succeed is to clearly define the responsibilities and requirements of the coxswain in your team. And what that means is that from different teams, the responsibilities, the roles, the characteristics in which the coaches have an expectation that the coxes take up or fulfill are different. And that could be from the 1v coach to the 2v or the 4 coach. That could be from the men's team to the women's team. That could be from school to university. Could be from university to national team. That could be from country to country. So they're always going to be different things. What often happens is that this role, these requirements aren't defined in teams that we find ourselves in. So you could be a really successful coxswain in one team, and then you move on and you join another one, and for some reason you just can't quite find your feet, and you don't know why that is. And the coach isn't just quite, not quite getting along with them. The coxswain isn't quite doing what you want them to do. And that's often because they just don't know. You don't know going into a new team what's expected of you unless it's defined. And so the proactive coxswain will take the time to go and find their coach and to ask them what these things are. And one of the most unique and beneficial exercises you can do, and this was something that's really driven by Henry Fieldman, the coxswain of the British Women's 8 from this year's Olympic Games, is to make sure that the job description of the coxswain in the team that you're in, or the boat that you're in, and the role you're going for is clearly defined and articulated. And so when we think about that, we're thinking about the objectives and responsibilities and those characteristics. And that's a nice kind of simple 3 things for you to try to work towards. So as coaches, whether we've got coaches or we've got coxes on the call, we want you to take the time to work out what these things are and have a think about your teams now, the team that you're in, the team that you coach, and what these might actually be. So the objectives could be something like delivering the training program. or it could be to run the drills so that the coach is able to coach. And those responsibilities are then going to be more kind of actionable components of that overarching objective. So if it is to deliver the training program, that would be, in terms of roles and responsibility, that might be to run the drills in the specified order according to the prerequisite program for the day. It could be in a different team to maintain the equipment and make sure that the boats are all set up the same. It could be to de-rig and re-rig. And then we think about the characteristics. So it could be leadership, it could be collaborative, team-driven, self-led, any of those sort of things you think about. So have an idea in your head of when you apply for a job or you send a job advert, and it's going to clearly list you all these things, and you can write your own sort of version, really, of what that is for the coxswain. Oh, that's a fun part. Okay. Now, everyone loves a bit of ChatGPT these days. You can ask ChatGPT what the key responsibilities, you can even ask it to write a job description for the coxswain in rowing. And these are some of the three, it's not numbered correctly, that's my error. These are some of the roles and responsibilities that ChatGPT just generates and spits at you from its deep dive of the internet. So that could be safety and risk management. Nice and simple. You're going to oversee the safety of the crew during training and competitions, and it's ensuring that all those safety protocols are followed. It could be monitoring the rowing environment for potential hazards. So in the previous webinar, we were talking about coxing in challenging conditions. Noticing those conditions, changes in the weather, changes in the water, what's happening to the channel buoys, is there any debris in the water? The next fundamental comes into what we do as coxes, and that's down to steering and boat control. So we want the boat to be steered safely and effectively during practice and competition. It wants to be efficient. We want to be able to make time-based or time-critical decisions in these conditions to avoid obstacles, to manage the environment, to take advantage strategically of what's happening in the race. And we might have to adjust what we're doing in the boat by communicating clearly and operating to try to optimize that race strategy. And building on that with our race strategy and our decision making. So there's a really close working relationship between the coxswain and the coach, where you're developing these strategies, you're developing the terminology of how you're going to articulate the expectations or what you're trying to do in the crew, in the boat. You might be thinking about the different strengths and weaknesses that you've got within the team, maybe what other crew strengths and weaknesses are and how you might be able to play to that. Maybe there's something built into it about how you might monitor the training. Are you going to write up some sort of speed chart or give your kilometers that you've done every single training session into a table that the coach sees, so the coach knows the mileage, the speed at which you did it, what your results are from pieces? All those little bits of information can come through. So I think that's a pretty good start from ChatGPT to try and get us down the route of what we're actually looking for. And if we want to try and form this description and how we're going to write it up starting from scratch, trying to think about the greater vision, the team as a whole. Like, what is our Virginia, they like to call it their big fat ugly goal. You know, what's the big thing you really want to work for that you're scared to say in front of people because you're worried that they're going to be like, you can't achieve that? You know, what's the big vision of the team? And then think about that long-term goal and what does the coxswain do to help the team work towards that goal? And so we're kind of working in reverse. The same way you might design a training program, you go from the key end goal, the key performance, and you work backwards to periodize it. You can work backwards from your goals to think about how you want to formulate the structure of the expectations of what you want from your coxswain. A good thing to think about is the style, the coaching style of the coach themselves. So if the coach wants to be the one that does the technical coaching on land and doesn't want the coxswain to do that, then what can the coxswain do? Do you want the cox to simply run the drills. So that might be call the pauses on the ergo. That might be call the rate changes. Those little things can make such a difference because you understand what your role is and how you fit in the exact scenario that you're in, and then you can maximize what you're looking for. Coaches often have certain things that they find effective, certain nuances that they like to go towards, and trying to have those be really clear and known is going to help you to do your job on what they view your job in the best possible way. And I think communicating with other people of, are there new ways to do it? Could we expand? Could we explore different opportunities? What do other teams do? That might be other teams within your whole squad itself. That might be other universities. That might be coaches talking to colleagues. That might be coxes talking to coxes that they know that Cox oversees. Anything along those lines. Knowledge is power. And if we've got the information there, then we have the greatest opportunity to formulate our own plan and formulate our own strategy. And this is such a basic table that I formulated on, I was going to call it, what do you call it? Art back in the day, Smart Paint, something like that. That was on the old laptop. But it's as simple as, it can be as standard as you want. You can write your job description on a piece of paper with a pencil and off you go. But just taking the time to sit down and work out what that is and fill in what these things might be. So I've been in a team where the objective of the coxswain was to assist the coaches in coordinating groups on land and on the water, and that was by managing the fleet. So what that means is, whether it's the team training on land and we've got 2 groups operating on the ergometer, which might be the faster group, or it might be a group doing pieces or a group doing tech, my role was to coordinate who's going in the right group, they understand the session plans, and that the session itself can be run. It wasn't to necessarily coach the rowers on the rowing machines. So there's some quite clear differences there. Roles and responsibilities could be something like execute that session for the day. That includes the warm-up, the drills, and the timing of the pieces. And so in the same team, my role on the water was to the T, to the letter, to execute and run the session exactly as it was written down on the whiteboard before I went out. So that was from exactly how the warm-up would be run, exactly how the pieces would be run, exactly how the warm down would be run, exactly how we come into the dock. The simple ability to follow instructions to the letter, to the stroke, 3 strokes, pausing at the release, 10 strokes continuous in 4s on the square, you're going to get that right. If you do 2 strokes pausing at the release and then go to 10, I've missed a stroke, and I'd be told that. So the ability to stay switched on, it's repetitive, and it might seem like really minor things, but what it then means is then when you're going into a stressful racing situation, you've really trained your mind. You're able to think with clarity. You're able to deal with a lot of information in a short space of time, and you're able to have that selective attention of what you choose, that kind of that flow state of the information that you take in and the information that you put out. And that's very different to other teams where it might be more of a flexible warm-up or a flexible session. And then the characteristics in order to be able to execute that. So demonstrating leadership and operating both independently and within a group, I think, is something that's so important. And that means that not only are you leading a team, but you're leading yourself. And often as a cox, you can kind of find yourself in a situation where you might be waiting for someone to tell you to do something. And the fastest learners and the best operators have the ability to lead themselves at the same time, but also the ability to know when to lead and know when to be led. And this is quite a cool part of this kind of talk for you guys and trying to get those juices flowing, because we've got such a unique speaker set here on the call, because there's so many unique experiences, there's so many different backgrounds in which we have performed, anything from school to collegiate to national team. those different levels, different races, and in different countries. And I guarantee on every single one of those teams, there is some crossover and there's also some differences. And I think this is where I thought that it's such a cool chance to kind of bring Zoe in with a really clear and fresh perspective on exactly how this plays out, and how those variances occur and what they might be.
So we're going to get a little bit into what I did this summer. I'll start with some background. So I did 4 years on the rowing team at UVA, the women's team. I was my 4th year in and out of the varsity 8. I did not cox the varsity 8 at any championship races. I coxed it a little bit in the spring. But I coxed like an excellent second 8 of people that I loved. And so our team was going to Henley. And the way that they do it at UVA, or the way that they had always done it at UVA, was that they brought spares to travel to race. And they brought 2 rower spares and a coxswain spare anywhere. And this included the Henley campaign. So I was not in the UVA boat for Henley, but I was brought with the UVA travel group. Simultaneous to this, sort of the way that the spring was unfolding, in April, I received an invite to selection camp for the under 23s for the United States on the women's side. So that was, I think they invited 24 rowers and they invited 4 coxes. So I was one of 4 coxswains who was getting ready to go to selection camp. And they structure it so that you can do a Henley campaign and then go to selection. So I was sort of getting ready, traveling to the UK, getting ready to sort of be there, supporting my teammates, cheering them on. And I think maybe I had gotten back from a jog or carrying oars, and Morgan came up to me and she said, would you like to race? And I said, what? She goes, would you like to race in a boat at Henley? And I said, yeah, of course. And the follow-up to that was that essentially the under 23 system in the UK works a little bit different than the US, because some of them are in university locally and some of them are in university in the States. So like growing number are in university in the States. And so there was this training group that had been together for maybe a week in small boats that were going to do a campaign in the Random Challenge Cup at Henley, and they didn't have a coxswain. They had these 8 rowers. So the top of those 2 photos, these 8 rowers, 2 Yale, 2 Texas, Syracuse, Stanford, Cal, and Harvard, these 8 women, and they had a coach. They didn't have a coxswain. And so I got to go out, that it was early in the next morning, go out to Caversham, which is where the GB team trains, which is like a private laned rowing lake, which is not something we have here in the States, but very, very cool. And I got to go and step into this 8 of women, and sort of it was basically a trial session. But the unique part of that, like, first day experience, was that before I ever got on the water, the coach, Pete Shepard, and the stroke seat, Ellie Kate, pulled me aside and were like, this is the technical model that we're working for. They gave me like 3 points. They were like, we want to emphasize the swing through the hips. We want to be very locked on at the front. We want to emphasize being really loose into the stern. And so I got that sort of locked in before I ever stepped foot into that boat. I had an understanding of what the technical goals were for the group. And then I sort of got on the water, had a session. This was on a Wednesday, and the qualifier that they had to race in was on Friday. And so I got in this boat. We did like 14K or some like 12K, some number of laps. And we docked, and they basically said, like, do you want to race with us? I said, of course, because I think that the opportunity to sort of hop in a crew and race is super unique, and like, unless it's prohibitive, always say yes. And so we did the qualifier. We qualified through, and then I got to spend, it was a Friday qualifier, and then the next race was also on a Friday. And so I got to spend the week out at Caversham training with essentially the GB U23s with these 8 women. And I remember it, like, the boat felt very different to what I had been used to at UVA. It felt like it was a little bit quicker, but it also felt very intentional in terms of adherence to the technical model, where the goal was not just to sort of go as hard as you can and hope the boat goes fast, but the goal was actually to sort of to work the steps and to work through the pattern and to achieve boat speed that way. I also think that the structuring of the way that the boat was coached, I would get handed essentially like a training program, a plan for the day, and go and execute it. There was a coach on a bicycle, but there are no coaching launches out of Caversham. So you're basically, the coxswain's job is to execute the training start to finish. You meet at a certain time, you brief, you get hands-on, you go out, you do the session, and that includes like we would do pieces. And so you meet with whatever boat you're piecing next to and do pieces with them. And sort of that, getting to do that was a big confidence builder for me after my season at Virginia. Being able to step into that role and feel like, be getting positive feedback and feel like I was succeeding was huge for me, because we didn't make it past the Friday at Henley, which was a little bit gutting, but big kudos to the crew that we raised. I stayed at Henley through Sunday, and then I had 24 hours to report to selection camp to try and make a USA boat. And the 4 coxswains that were there, including myself, the other 3 I respect, and I'm still close with actually all 3 of them, but I went in with no expectations, because the 3 coxswains were the Brooks coxswain, who had just won the Island, the Texas coxswain, who had just won the national championship, and the young woman who had coxed the USA coxed for the year prior. So from my perspective, I essentially was there to run seat racing and then leave. That was sort of what I thought was maybe going on. But I think that having sort of the confidence built to know I can get in a crew of 8 people that I've never met before, and who I don't know them from school, I don't know what they're doing, and to sort of help coordinate them was huge in terms of being able to step into the selection environment and feel confident that I can make a boat go fast, that like I have a say in how this boat goes, and I'm gonna make my boat go fast. I'm gonna put my boat in the best water, and I'm gonna like hold them to certain expectations, and I'm gonna maneuvering safely at that camp was huge. And so I think eventually I was selected to the women's 8, which was the prioritized sweep entry. And I think that would not have been sort of a similar experience without having had that Henley campaign to build up into it. So I have denotated a little bit on the slides. The similarities, safety and steering, were huge. I think, especially when you're on a shorter time frame, like a selection camp or just a short campaign, don't make a safety mistake if you can help it. Don't hit a tree, don't hit a buoy. I think like they're putting their lives in your hands, they're putting their trust in your hands. If you can prove over however many sessions you have that you take that very seriously, people are going to buy into what you say. The other similarity is I think the boat feel and technical knowledge is huge. So being able to have a coach tell you, this is the technical model I'm looking for, this is how I want the boat to feel. You need to then be able to identify, what am I feeling, and how do I, like, what changes can I ask for? How do I phrase that to get people to execute the style that I'm looking for? And on our evals that we got back just after camp selection, my like over and over again in my comments were, it was boat feel, it was boat feel, boat feel, boat feel. So being able to feel and translate what's happening is going to help you make the boat go fast. The biggest difference was the structures of practices. At camp, the coaches were running the session, and our job was to keep the boats level, to drop to pairs, to take the rate down. They sat us down and they said, we want you to keep the boats side by side and level. We want to be able to coach all of the athletes. We want you to keep the boats side by side and level. When I was at the under 23s with GB, it was just it was just me in like a lane, a buoyed lane on a course, and I did laps alone in the 8, which was, it's easier, but it's maybe less exciting. And then in terms of translatable skills, I think you sort of, as a coxswain, you can either save your racing for race day, or you can start to drip feed. And when I say drip feed, I like you starting to sneak in phrases that you know you're going to go back to when you're in the racing environment. That's going to trigger then, oh, I remember that happening. So for an athlete, I remember what the boat felt like when we were thinking about that. Then you can say one word and their mind is going to switch on, which in the racing environment is super crucial. You need to be able to get them switched on. And then also coxing the elite athlete, I put that down because I think there is a difference between your good, solid Division I rower and the people who are looking to make these national teams and the people who are getting like funneled into these selection pools. Generally speaking, you don't have to ask them to go harder. They're going to know what it feels like to do those efforts, to do that max effort level, to do that threshold effort level, to do a UT2 effort level, to do an easy effort level. You don't have to modulate those bits for them. It's more about shaping the effort that they're putting into boat speed. So I think that that's sort of the crux of a D1 athlete versus an elite international athlete is it's more of a shaping and less of an encouraging.
Zoe, what were the kind of like similarities or differences in the vocabulary used by the coaching staff on the US team versus the British team, and how was that for you?
Yeah, so I got super lucky that those British girls all go to school in the US, so I did not have to say bow side and stroke side, and they say easy there, not way enough. They knew what I was talking about when I just said it my way, which was super nice and super easy. I actually think that weirdly the coaches at US camp said some stuff that I really had no idea what they were talking about. And so sometimes that's like a technical thing. Like they talked a lot about hang, but not hang in terms of suspension, hang in terms of letting the blade hang up at the catch. And so they were saying no hang, no hang, no hang. And eventually I was like, can you explain? Ask for clarity if you don't know what a coach is talking about, because sometimes they think that you know what's going on because maybe it looks like things are going right. Your coach is not a mind reader. Your coach would love to be a mind reader probably, but your coach is not a mind reader. They're not going to know what you're talking about. They don't know when you're confused unless you ask. And that was something at Virginia also, where like if one of the coaches was saying something to the boat and it just was not clicking, not working, you can ask, or you just sometimes we couldn't hear them through the megaphones. I think being able to say put your hand up and say, I didn't get that. Could you explain? Could you elaborate? It's worth the 30 seconds in a session to really take the time, go through, get everybody on the same page. The boat will go faster. Everybody trying to do the same thing in the same way makes the boat go faster. And I think that that's something as a coxswain that it took me a while to learn, was people aren't necessarily going to know what I'm talking about, but keep it simple, explain when necessary was huge for me. So I guess that kind of brings into how to adapt between team environments. So I also, when I was at camp, got to cox the Dartmouth men's 8 and the under 23 men's 8. So I just spent a lot of time in different boats, because for me, if somebody asks me and I'm there and available, the answer is always yes. Will you cox this boat? Yes, I will. I'm there. I'm in. I think that's been a huge way that I've grown as a coxswain. But that being said, you don't always know what a coach is looking for. So asking questions, especially about the technical model, sometimes they'll spell it out for you. So Shep spelled it out for me. He said, these are the things that I want. These are the speeds that I want. These are the rates that I want. Here's how I want you to do it. At US camp, it was a little bit harder to sort of define those things, because the coaches were trying to keep it super impartial and look at the selection pool. And so they were super reserved for the first couple weeks until the team was named. But then once the team was named, I started asking questions of Tro, who was the coach of the 8, of how actually do you want us to be approaching taking the catch? how actually do you want us to be approaching a builder? And we started to develop a crew vocabulary that then we could use in the racing environment and in the practice environment that then like really helped us step on in terms of our speed. Being open to feedback, I think you're not always going to get it right on the first try. You're not always going to be automatically what the coach is looking for. There are going to be times when the coach is asking something of you that you don't know what to do. There are times when you're going to mess up. They're going to ask you to do something and you do it wrong. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing a bad job, but it might mean that you're doing the wrong thing, or you're trying to do what you've done at a different program and it's not what the coach is looking for. So you need to be able to redirect and to be redirected into sort of what they're looking for. That being said, you can always, like, your style, your coxing style is not contingent on any one program. Like my coxing style predicates on how the boat is feeling. And I would say that my coxing style is a lot about knowing the individual athletes and being able to have connections with the individual athletes that will pull them back in with me when their like bodies are screaming during a 2K race. And other coxswains are super, super, super aggressive. Other coxswains are super reserved. That style doesn't necessarily have to change. You can mold your style to fit what the program is looking for, but ultimately being your authentic self is going to get people to buy into what you're asking them to do, and it's going to differentiate you from maybe coxswains that you're competing with. Taking opportunities to cox, as I said, a wide variety of crews. Getting to go in the under 23 men's 8 on my off day was not necessarily something that I had been expecting, but they said, we need a coxswain. We're trying to run 3 4s and the 8. We don't have enough coxswains. Will you come out and do this water session with us on the off day? We had Saturday off, they had Sunday off. So the scheduling worked out and I said, sure. And it was super valuable because I got to feel really, really fast speeds that I think like being able to be in a boat that's going really, really, really fast is always super valuable. The second bullet there is a little bit more more general, but something that I talked a lot with Soph, who was one of the other coxswains at selection camp with me, was talking about riding the wave of selection, where I think especially in the condensed selection environment, things feel really big. You mess something up, oh, I'm getting cut. It's over for me. I'm getting cut. You have a good day. Oh, I'm making the team. It's me. Like I have it in the bag. Being able to step back, have coping strategies, have ways to decompress. Like I run every day. It's my way to process things. It's my way to decompress. Being able to ride the wave and not get sucked into the funnel of speculating and overanalyzing the data and trying to get rowers to pick you and trying to get the coach on your side, but just doing your best coxing and trusting that if that's the right thing and the coach has the like right priorities, that you're going to get selected. And if you don't do the best coxing for that crew, doesn't mean you're bad. It just means there's a better fit for that crew or for that coach. Some coaches are looking for really specific things. Like there are some coaches whose job descriptions I will never meet because whatever, because they don't get along with me or I don't get along with them, or they're looking for a different communication style. And learning to sort of be okay with that and know that it doesn't define me as an athlete was a huge step for me that I think really like started at Henley. And the last thing is like be a teammate first. A coxswain is a coxswain, and yes, you're in charge and you're a leader, but first you're an athlete on the team. And that to me just means that you're not above sitting down with the slowest rower on the erg and just talking them through their plan. And you're also not above, you're not above carrying blades down. You're not above helping to carry the boat. You're not above the coach sitting you down and talking you through stuff that feels second nature. And also it's the rower's responsibility and the coach's responsibility to treat you as a teammate and as an athlete, not just an administrative assistant.
Awesome. So we've got some great kind of perspectives for you there of kind of similarities, differences, the types of roles that coxes undertake in different teams. And I feel like a school teacher now. I'm going to test how much everyone's listening and engaging. What I would love to see is if there's a really, really willing volunteer, and there are no right or wrong answers in this, but someone who can think about their team and think about what they actually think that their objectives, their roles, responsibilities, and the characteristics that they might have on their Coxswain job description might be, and if they're willing to share them. And you can either unmute and talk it out, or you can put it in the chat box. But would love to hear any thoughts that have popped up in your head whilst this has been going on. And if not, I'm going to put Cam on the spot. We've got to have one brave volunteer on here.
Hi, Morgan. This is Emily. Thank you so
Hello.
much, Morgan. That was so awesome. Thank you for sharing. I don't know if this is exactly what you were asking for, Morgan, but something that I found so powerful was Zoe talking about what she saw on her evals, were how powerful her boat feel kept coming into play time and time again. I loved hearing about that. I'm curious, based off of the Coxswain evals that you've done in the past for yourself, what some of the biggest strengths that you felt you brought to your boats were. I don't know, was that the question you were asking, or am I just going rogue here?
No, this is good.
No, this is great.
Zoe, do you want to answer? You answer that.
I'm answering your strengths or mine.
Well, you can answer mine as well if you like.
I've never had Morgan as a coxswain. I've coxed next to Morgan once. But my biggest strengths on the eval were boat feel, and then people just, I don't know, people loved that I cared. That was big at UVA. Was like I missed one practice over 4 years. People love the buy-in, and I think that sends a pretty powerful message. And then also people love a coxswain who steers a tight line. People love to feel like they're getting the inside of a turn. I think that's something that will show up on evals again and again and again if you are doing it right.
I think as well, obviously only worked at UVA for 1 year. But I think that what's a really important part of kind of Zoe's backstory is like coming into her collegiate coxswain campaign, you were pretty fresh and pretty raw, and you had some very clear guidance and coaching from Kelsey Shadoin, and I think that the way that she operated as a coach and her coaching of coxswains was like, you really knew what she wanted, like that. You knew that job description. You could probably write that down, and then that meant that when you were training for NCAAs, like you knew where to put your boat to get the best out of your boat, to get the best coaching out of her, and I think that's where you really see it come into play. Whereas there's no anonymity in it. You're not trying to kind of stabbing around in the dark and trying to figure it out. And I think that's the same sort of thing for me in my experience at Oxford with Christine Wilson. Like I knew what she wanted, and it took me a long time to find that out or to learn that. And that means when I started, I was getting it wrong all the time, you know?
Yeah.
I could have been crashing into everything. Like it didn't matter, figuratively, literally, whatever. But I think taking the time and being patient in your coaching and also in your coxing to have that kind of exploratory element and that vulnerability is what's going to give you the biggest growth, really, within that.
Yeah, I think that Kelsey spent the first semester of my time at UVA basically just yelling at me through the megaphone, but in a constructive way, not in a mean way. But I knew exactly what she wanted, and I knew exactly what she wanted technically. I knew what she wanted in terms of how we were running a practice. And I knew what she wanted in terms of how I conducted myself with other coxswains. And I really do credit her with the way that the Coxswain culture evolved over my time at Virginia, where like the people that I would turn to, and now still the people that I turn to when I have a question or a problem, are always other Coxswains. Always. My Coxswain friends from Selection, my Coxswain friends from Virginia. Other Coxswains are the only people that have been in your shoes, and I think it's huge to have that group of like that resource.
I think as well, like an important thing to consider is that if you sit down and you think about what a Coxswain job description might be, and you generally can't come up with anything, then actually it means you don't know what the Cox does, and so that gives you the place to start from. And just simply just kind of almost planting that seed and giving it time to grow and come into kind of fruition is important, because it's going to elevate the standard of either your coaching to your Coxes, or it's going to elevate the standard of your Coxing as the Cox yourself. We've got a little bit of time kind of left now. We've got just over 15 minutes. And I think it's nice to kind of open it up to any questions that anybody else has got on the chat. They can just be Coxing related. They can be job description related. They can be, is it buoy or boy? Whatever you want, really.
I might kick it off, unless someone unmutes or chucks something in the chat. But I'd love to follow on from Emily's point about fostering boat feel, because I think both of you have referenced that on a number of occasions. And just going back to the previous slide, is that a characteristic, or is that a role and responsibility? Because I would say sort of the overarching objective would be, in what way is a Coxswain a team leader, fostering, developing boat speed, there's safety in there somewhere. But I'm curious, just from both of your perspectives, how have you evolved? How do you articulate the evolution of boat feel? Because we use the language, but what is that actually in concrete actionable, like, how do you guys describe that?
Oh, I think that's quite hard to answer. It's interesting because I think one of the best things any Cox can do is to actually row. Because then you feel the sensations of what's going on both the ergo and in the boat, sculling and sweep, port side, starboard side. And then you can start to associate the word with the feeling. And my coaching and my coxing are the same, in that I'm the biggest advocate of, I want my athletes, I want my teammates to be able to speak boat better than they can speak to each other. And what that means is to be able to, through the feel, through sensitivity, be able to, to be able to use the right word to describe what they're actually feeling and what that part is. And to start with, that might be the rowing stroke feels like a heavy, dull movement, a heavy, dull bit of impulse. And that's where you start with boat feel. You're like, I don't really know what it is. And then you get the coaches telling them to change the way the blade goes in the water. So all of a sudden you feel like you're sucked into the air before you start to feel a heavy boat. And we're like, okay, well, now we've got suspension. So you form the association between the feeling and the word. And it kind of snowballs along like that. But there's a balance between you yourself being able to connect a word to the feeling, but also the coach to be able to draw out or challenge the athlete to become aware of what it should feel like or what they might feel like. But I think it's less fluffy than I think some people try to make it seem. When you hit a tennis ball wrong, or a golf ball. This is a cracking example. When you hit a golf ball right, it is zinging along. You're like, I have nailed this. Like you swing back, you come through, off it goes. It's really clean. It's really nice. When you get it wrong, it ricochets up your arms. It like goes through your back. The ball probably goes straight in the air and it hits the ceiling. You know you've done it wrong. And so our instincts as humans is to be instinctively lazy. So we'll try and move our bodies to not necessarily feel the most load. But when we move them in the right way that's connected through like a long leverage way, and the way the hull will respond to that, our body will let us know that was effective and that felt quite good. And so teaching people to run with their instinct and to come back to that, I think is a good way, a good knack around it, I guess. Zoe, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that
trust your instinct, develop awareness, and try and put language to that, I think is super. Zoe,
yeah, I think for me, I spent my entire time in high school pretty much in a Cox 4, and then most of my first 3 years at Virginia. So not being able to rely on what you see, but having to rely on what you feel, and what does the boat feel like when the coach is saying, like, to a rower, yes, good change. Because then if you know, oh, the boat just felt like that, you ask for the change, the boat feels the right way, you can say to them, yes, yes, do it again. Yes, yeah. Like, that's my favorite call is, yes, do it again. Yes, yes, yes. Like, immediate positive reinforcement when something goes well, not necessarily immediate negative if it's not going well, but changing how you're talking about it. But knowing, I asked this person to get their blade in faster, not looking for the blade, but feeling for the pickup. That's how you provide them with good feedback. And the way that I think I learned to do that was by listening to, it's the same thing. It's Kelsey again. Like, she would like ride on her launch and sit and just over and over again say like from your hips, from your hips, from your hips, until this person would get it right. And then she'd go, yes, do it again, like, yes, yes, yes. And you feel the boat pick up. And so building those connections between, this is the change that was asked for, this is what it felt like when the change happened correctly, and this is the appropriate turn of speed to associate with that change. The more that you are like paying attention to the way the coach is interfacing with the athletes, the more that you're going to be able to feel for, identify, correct, and make the boat go faster.
Yeah, the visual I have from both of your descriptions, like you've got these invisible dials that, good job. You turn that up a little bit, you turn that back a little bit. You're constantly thinking about not just the individuals, but how the sum of the parts come together. And when you do feel something different, even if you don't know what it is, that feels different, and acknowledging that. And I think, Morgan, you might have mentioned it in the previous one, when you do have super experienced people in the boat and you say, I felt something there. Did you feel that? Because it's different when you have someone less experienced. When you've got someone super experienced and they say, yeah, it's the person in the 3 seat, when they put that thing in the water, the boat takes off. And then you look at it and go, oh my God, they're 3 blades late. That felt awful. Hey, put the blade in early in the 3 seat, and all of a sudden the thing takes off, Yep. And a really experienced person in the stern can feel it better than they can actually see it. So I love that. Okay, I'll stop talking. Questions here. What are the specific characteristics that you would attribute to a good leader in the context of being a coxswain? Great question, Jody. Who wants to take that one?
I think this is an interesting one. So I think they are very similar to what people look for when they're looking to hire people. So you want leadership. You want to be able to demonstrate leadership in teams, but also to be self-led. You want to be able to demonstrate good initiative, a team player, collaborative. They want to be a bit of a creative thinker. I think that it's I don't necessarily know the word for this, but they want to be able to demonstrate that they can follow instructions but also think for themselves, which can sometimes seem a bit contradictory in some people's eyes. But I think those sorts of things are really important, And then the big one for me actually is exactly how Zoe said about authenticity. If I tried to cox like Zoe and Zoe tried to cox like me, we'd both do such a bad job. But if I cox like me and Zoe coxes like Zoe, we'd probably get ourselves into a bit of a dogfight. And I think that's what's important to remember, is that you're going to have these unique character traits. You're going to have a unique personality style, the things that give you energy and a bit of a buzz. And if you can continue to attach those to this job description itself, then that's when you're going to have real flair and really step on it in what you're doing. Zoe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that the other piece of that is, to me, knowing when not to speak. Like, I think that there's a stereotype of coxswains as being really loud, being really vocal leaders. And I found, especially actually in the selection environment, that being more of a leader in terms of forging a lot of individual connections, making sure that you have a sort of finger on the pulse of the whole group, not just sort of the essential, like, smaller, the people who seem like they're at the top of the pyramid, or the people who are at the center of it, but really having everybody sort of in your sight, have a finger on the pulse of the team, so that when, I don't know, the 5 seed of the third 8 has missed 2 days of training, so you can send them a message and say, hey, how are you doing? Because frankly, like, you never know when that person is going to then speak to doing that, getting a reputation for being a really good teammate, I think is huge to being a leader, because people are a lot more willing to listen to somebody for whom they feel personally bought in.
Yeah. And Mary said the same thing first up this morning. Be a good teammate first, and the rest will fall into place. I think that care for your fellow teammates is such a critical thing, whether it's the best person in the program or the newest person in the program. I think they're fabulous and very wise words. I think Michael's question's a fascinating one. He's working with 7th and 8th graders and rotates everyone through the coxswain seat. And parents complain, probably because the kids are complaining. But so at best, the kids cox once every 2 weeks. Do you have a suggestion how to make the rotation easier? Because of the gap between coxing days, they're basically starting from scratch each time they get in the seat. Is this a coxswain issue? Is this a parent issue? Is it a coaching issue, or is it all of the above?
I'm laughing because believe it or not, I'm actually 30. I know I don't necessarily look that. I get ID'd all the time, but when I started coxing, or when I started rowing, they happened at the same time. So I started when I was 10, and we started in a wooden coxed quad, and that was a stern coxed quad. But what we basically would do is we'd get in the boat and we'd row a K or something like that, and then we'd all swap around and move 1 seat forward, and the cox would climb all the way down to the bow seat. And then you carry on again, and we'd swap around like this the whole session as a bunch of juniors, a bunch of 10-year-olds, just keep going like that all the time. And it'd be hilarious because, you would get to just basically shout at your mates and tell them to pull harder. And then you swap around and they'd get their own bag. And we would then rotate in the exact same way through racing. So we'd go off to head racing, or we'd go off to, sprint races. And it'd be the exact same rotation, the same group. And I think at the junior level, it's that you should be swapping and rotating all the time. We're not specializing. It's junior rowing. And actually, if you're all swapping around, I don't know necessarily these days with how safe it is to be swapping all the time, although that's quite swapping positions in university level is pretty a common thing you do on the water in the US. You pull the boat together and you swap over and off you go. But I think you shouldn't be afraid of swapping. I think that's a great thing to do. I think you learn so much. You learn so much in the way the seating order changes. Some people have got rhythm, and it's not being a nasty thing. Some people haven't got rhythm. That's just the way it goes. And you start to work that out, and you want to be able to notice what that's like. What does that feel like, and how does the boat feel when I sit in different seats? So I think that's a great way to do it. I'm obviously biased because that's the way it was done for me. And even at university level, if I think back to, you know, at Oxford, we would swap rowers around all the time, swap positions. Coxes got swapped. I think that there's, for me, I don't see a problem with it. I think rotate as much as you can without disrupting the session. But yeah, keep swapping around.
Zoe?
Yeah, I mean, my first rowing, I'm 5'7" now. My first rowing experience, I was a whopping 4'11", and I got thrown in the bow seat of an 8. And I think that knowing what it felt like to row before I ever knew what it felt like to cox was the most valuable thing for my coxing development. And I think that for rowers, understanding the responsibilities that their coxswain has is going to make them like infinitely better teammates and better athletes, because they can understand both like sort of the limitations of that position and also how maybe they can ask their coxswain to do what the boat needs. But I think that the navigating that dynamic is challenging in that a lot of places coxing is framed as an undesirable thing to do. People want to work out, they don't want to cox. And so I think also reframing how we talk about coxing and reframing how we talk about sort of it's your turn to cox, and have like starting to build excitement around that, but also just sort of build the understanding that the coxswain especially in an 8, like there are no straight 8s and there are no straight 8s for a reason. So changing how we talk about coxing, I think, can sort of help maybe lessen the blow a little bit.
Yeah, that reframing I think is absolutely critical, and how we talk about the coxswain. And I think, Zoe, your example with the British under 23 group of having full responsibility for the entire session is such a wonderful example of Morgan, what you mentioned of this balance between following instructions and having the autonomy to make decisions with all the information in front of you. And how many times we hear at every level coxswains making the wrong decision on race day, and you trace it back because everything that happens during practice is hand fed to them from the moment they literally walk into the boathouse. So finding that right balance, and Michael, I don't know if that's helpful for your situation, but perhaps it's a little bit to educate the parents of the importance of the coxswain, because without a coxswain you can't get on the water. So okay, if no one wants the cox, cool, we stay inside. I mean, it's a little bit of an extreme example, but then for the rowers to understand that, or for the whole group, that you can benefit from sitting in the coxswain seat because you're seeing a lot, you're working on your calls, and one day some of those people might be in coxswain boats. So developing those skills of steering, making calls, being aware of the conditions around them, it's a holistic development. And from a coaching perspective, I'm always very sensitive to how am I interacting with the coxswain? Am I talking directly to the athletes, or am I using my coxswain as the voice piece, as the leader to give them that role in basically running the session? And that if for whatever reason the launch breaks down, or I want them to row on their own, they're not looking around going, oh my God, where's the coach? They're able to take it on their own. Jody, I see your hand is raised. I know we're very close. We're at the top of the hour, so you might have to close this out, and Morgan and Zoe will give you the last word.
I wasn't trying to get the last word. I just wanted to share that aspect of teaching the parents the role of the coxswain is really, really key. When I was first coaching novices, I had a parent livid with me because I wouldn't put her daughter into the coxswain seat in a race. And her argument was, well, she's coxed 3 times at practice. So why are you putting a varsity rower in the coxswain seat during the race? And I had to explain to her the role of the coxswain and the fact that that would be dangerous for everybody. So I think that's a really key point, is that we do need to educate the parents what the coxswains do.
Yeah, and I'd be very wary of a parent that that pushes back on safety being the number one priority in everything that we do, and particularly the role of the coxswain. When we're talking about middle schoolers driving a $40,000 boat with 8 other people in it, it's a big responsibility. So, Zoe, final word to you, and then Morgan, you close us out.
Yeah, I think that just overall, like for coaches, tell your coxswains what they need to do. If they come to you with a question, be able to answer it about their responsibility. It will make your boats faster and it will make your coxswains better. And then for coxswains, be thinking about like, what is my role? What is my responsibility? And come to practice prepared to execute that every day.
Awesome.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I think echoing that and just building on it with, if you're a coach and you're watching any of these webinar series from US Rowing and their coxing conference, then you clearly are investing time in your coxes, or you are starting that process of making the change of investing that time, and that's really important, and that's great, and it's continuing to commit to that and make that change, and just giving it time to understand your expectations and exactly what you want. And in the same way that you've taken the time to almost learn the sport of coaching the rower, it's taking the time to learn the sport of coaching the cogs.
Yeah, super session. Thank you, everybody. And Zoe and Morgan, I really appreciate it. If there's one word I could use to describe the session, it's just the authenticity that you've shared with everybody. So really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the conference.